What's going on, everyone? Alex here, and welcome back to another episode of Cheers to Gear, where we sit down, crack open a beer, and we talk about everything related to film and photography gear. And in today's episode, I have a very special guest, but before we jump into that, let's go ahead and roll that intro. In today's episode of Cheers to Gear, we're going to talk about our first bits of gear, and my guest today is my buddy Brayden. He has a YouTube channel. I'll be sure to link it down in the description below. But yeah, Brayden, thanks for being on the very first episode of Cheers to Gear where I have a guest.
I am honored. I'm ready to do this.
All right, that's good to know. Yeah, so I thought it'd be fun to do a Cheers to Gear episode where we talk about our first bits of gear that kind of just got us into this world of filmmaking and now what has now become YouTube. So I'll go ahead and let you start off with your first jump into your gear.
If we're talking like first gear I ever used, I actually used like a tape camera from my parents. But if we're talking about like the first camera I ever bought, I believe was a flip video camera. And that was after playing with my brother's flip video camera. So I decided to buy the same one. But the first one I bought, like that I did research into, was whatever this Sony Handycam is. This would be the actual first one that I actually purchased with my own money.
I think I had a Canon PowerShot. Is that what they were, PowerShots?
Yeah, that's the point and shoots, yeah.
Again, I think that was also my parents, but I took it. I can't remember if that did video and if I even made videos with it.
So before you even knew what you were doing, you were still a Canon guy.
Yes, even before I knew what I was doing, I was a Canon guy. Cause my parents had a Canon PowerShot, like little PowerShot camera, and I think I shot videos with it. Mainly, I did photos. I got really into photography when I was little, and then stopped doing it. But the very first camera that I bought to make videos with was a Canon. So it was the T2i. The T2i I made my first short film with, and I did actually a video on that like quite a while ago, talking about how I was a terrible filmmaker when I first started, and I'll be sure to link it right up here. But it really was. I actually wrote out like a script and storyboarded, and then I gave it to a friend, and I acted in it. That was the first biggest mistake, was acting in my own short film. And I was playing a hitman, but I was like 22, so it's like I just got out of high school and was like, all right, I'm off to go murder. So, but it was a pretty good camera. I mean,
I still love my T3i. I think it's a great camera to this day.
I can't remember if the T2i shot 1080p 24. I think it did. I think that was like the big, like cool, like selling point to that camera. It's crazy that camera got me into what I love to do for a living. So it's kind of weird. And it got so big that my dad was like, "Hey, we're gonna upgrade your camera. Yeah, and you got this price range, and that's it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I upgraded to a 70D.
Nice.
And I loved that camera because it had dual pixel autofocus. It was the first Canon that had, I believe, face tracking dual pixel autofocus.
Yeah, I didn't upgrade to an autofocus camera for a while because I went from the T3i to the 6D Mark 1.
Oh, you went to a full frame.
Yeah, I have it around here somewhere still. Yeah.
I wasn't that cool. I wasn't cool enough to run with the full frame gang just yet.
Yeah, I bought the 6D literally only because of Film Riot and them shooting on the 5D Mark II, and I just saw that and was like, that's what full frame's capable of. I was like, I'm gonna go 6D, and in my mind I was like, man, they have a 5D, I have a 6D. I just took a step above Film Riot, but nah, not really. I did not enjoy the 6D that much.
That's the crappy thing about Canon's like naming structure. You think 5D, it's like, okay, this is awesome. 5D Mark II was like a revolutionary camera for a lot of filmmakers. And then they release 6D and you're like, well, 6 is above 5. 6 must be better.
That was my exact thought. I was like, well, 6 is more than 5, so
you
get
would
the better one.
You would think like every average person, that would be their first thought. That would be my first thought. But
yeah.
And then even go above that and go to 7D and you're like, yeah, this is.
And then you get into like 70D and you're like, this is 65 numbers better than the 5D. I'm way better than Film Riot. I think, yeah, in my era of owning the T3i and the 6D, that was like all through high school were those cameras. And the only thing I was shooting on those pretty much was I had a comedy sketch show when I was in high school that I did with a bunch of friends, and we would release weekly episodes, and they were entirely shot on those cameras. That's pretty much all I did with those. I didn't really get into doing short films until I upgraded to like cinema cameras.
I can't speak for every filmmaker out there, but I feel like it's a pretty common thing with a lot of filmmakers is when they first start getting into it, especially if they are in the age of high school and maybe college a little bit, they were all just like bullshit videos where they just were jumping off of roofs or they're wanting to be like the next Jackass. I made a bunch of stupid videos with friends as well, short little funny videos, and yeah, it wasn't until college, maybe a little after college, is when I was like, I want to do something serious. I'm tired of doing funny videos.
Yeah, upgrading from the 6D, I went to the C100 Mark II, and that's when I first was like, okay, I'm exiting the comedy sketch era. Let's start making short films. And it was right after I started making those short films is when I left high school and went on to film school. So yeah, it was definitely, there was a point where the switch flipped for me, and I was like, yeah, I'm done with the comedy sketch stuff. And
I guess this episode really isn't talking about our first bits of gear. It's really talking about what our first bit of, the timeline of what, like, basically the timeline of when I got a T2i to where I am now and what I have is essentially what this episode's about, which I'm totally cool with. The 70D I had for quite a while, and then I sold that because I started doing like weddings and stuff, and I started doing weddings with a friend, and he had a Sony A7S, and so he's like, you got to get a Sony. So I sold off all of that and actually sold my T2i. I don't even own my T2i anymore, which kind of is a bummer. I kind of wish I could have like kept that, but I was just taking every bit of money to put towards the Sony A7S, and that camera was the worst decision of my entire life.
Yeah, thus begins your brief departure away from Canon, which you clearly have gone back on very quickly.
Yeah, yes, very, very quickly. Actually, not quick enough. Let's be honest, not quick enough.
So yeah, I stuck with Canon for quite a while as well, but I realized if you just lay out my whole timeline, I jumped around from brands pretty heavily. Like, I thought it was a big deal that I was leaving Canon when I upgraded to my FX3 most recently, but honestly, the biggest deal was just I was leaving the EF system, not necessarily Canon, because I've been jumping around ever since.
You and I watch a lot of YouTubers in general, and yeah, they seem to, a lot of the big popular ones like the Matty Hippolyas, Armandos, even Film Riot have jumped around to different brands, and I've always wanted to do that, but you know, that's the thing with me is like I jumped to Sony, and I got burned pretty bad. The A7S, and then eventually I did upgrade to the A7S II, and even then I just was like, I just don't. And nothing against Sony, and even people had A7S2s to this day and are making amazing stuff out of it. But man, I tried my darndest to color grade and make that footage look amazing, and I just couldn't do it. It's like, it was so frustrating. And then I ditched the A7S II, and I think you kind of got me on the C100 Mark II, and that's what I'm filming on right now. It's what I'm filming on right now. And
yeah, how old is that camera? It still holds up.
This camera is like, yeah, the C100 Mark II is like 7 years old, but I would love to jump around, you know. So I know you have.
Yeah, I have luckily not been in a boat where I've been burned by a camera system, which is great, because I know you even know people who have been burned and have a bad taste in their mouth for even Blackmagic, which they're making some ridiculous stuff at the moment that is amazing. But yeah, I've not been burned by anybody, so I love Canon, still have the Canon C200, but I was ready to make a move over to Sony, which I'm shooting on the FX3 now, and yeah, the biggest change was just moving away from EF. That is a scary move when I have double-digit EF lenses here and now just one Sony E-mount lens. That is by far the scariest. But I would say at the moment the Sony FX3 is probably my favorite camera purchase I've ever had, ever.
Which I am absolutely shocked to hear you say that.
Yeah, I am a long-term Sony destroyer. I hated Sony with a passion, but I will say that they have just turned around with just that one update that changed the color science. Their color science in one update went from probably one of the most garbage color sciences on the market to one of the best. It's impressive what they've been able to do. Depending on what you're doing, obviously they have incredible systems for higher level shooters like the Venice system, but if you're just a general filmmaker and then doing YouTube on the side, I don't think you can beat Sony's lineup with the A7S III and the FX3. They are just the most perfect all-around cameras, and it's so shocking how quickly they came up. Like I said, in just one update, they completely fixed their color science, and then also their autofocus just caught up to Canon unbelievably fast. It's been crazy impressive.
I think Sony is it's in the lead right now with autofocus. Again, just the amount of videos I've watched on Sony's newer cameras, the autofocus, color science, it's really right up there with Canon, and especially their autofocus is above Canon from what I've seen, and because it just really sticks on that eye, whereas my R5 sometimes jumps to both, like jumps around to both eyes, and I'm just like whatever dominant eye is closer to camera, it's like that should be what it's focusing on. But
yeah, and I absolutely love the C200 still, but when I bought the Sony FX3, I obviously had planned on selling the C200, so it kind of sat in a box forever and I didn't touch it for a while. But recently, as I brought it back out, even a couple times with the C200, I find it like jumping and hunting for focus that I don't really remember it ever doing. And I think it's just because I'm getting used to Sony's, where it just really never loses it, ever, even in low light situations.
It kind of blows my mind, not to just like jump off like the topic of the gear that we're, the timeline of our gear, but yeah, it blows my mind like with cameras like, the Canon EOS R, the R5 and R6, all those newer ones, that the eye tracking is like phenomenal. It's like, it is really good in that system, but I just don't get why the cinema cameras don't have that feature. Really, the only Canon cinema camera that has eye tracking autofocus is the R5C, and it's just something that just has blown my mind because it's so good. It's like, Canon, why aren't you implementing this into your cinema cameras? I guess I don't know how difficult it would be if they can.
I could also see it. Yeah, I could see it being a situation as well where there's that strange preconceived notion that it's like the Sony cinema line or the Canon cinema line is this real, trying to be this real cinema line, and cinematographers aren't supposed to use autofocus. They're supposed to use manual focus, and there's all those preconceived notions around they don't need autofocus like that in these cameras. But with how the times are changing and even YouTubers buying cinema cameras these days for talking headshots and whatnot, I really think they need to be accounting for those people and throwing things like really good autofocus into cinema cameras as well. Because if you're a real cinematographer and you're using a focus puller and a follow focus, you can just flip that lens to manual and not use it.
There's one brand that absolutely sucks at autofocus, which I owned for a short period of time while I owned my C100 Mark II, to just jump back on the track of our timelines of gear that we've owned, and that is the GH5. That camera was an all right camera. I'll give it that. It was definitely an all right camera. I definitely preferred it over Sony A7S II So, but yeah, I don't know why I jumped on that and decided to have a GH5 and a C100 Mark II. So I did kind of jump to, in that sense, I still stayed with Canon, but I was like kind of playing around with, you know, another brand. Kind of had Panasonic on the back end. So
that's definitely a brand that I've never thought about or considered jumping to, was Panasonic. That's one of the only brands I've never had experience with owning personally. Really not interested either.
Yes, I had Panasonic as a mistress in my relationship of camera gear. Yeah, I sold off the GH5, and then I picked up a 5D Mark IV. I managed to swing a 5D Mark IV because it was a good B cam to the C100 Mark II, and I kind of rocked those two for a little bit with my freelance gigs.
And that is another thing that I would point out, is you got the 5D and you kind of have stuck with Canon because of your photography side. I don't do photography. I've not been bitten by the photography bug yet. I obviously could get into it pretty easily being into video, but I just haven't been interested. And that's one of the big reasons why I made the move over to Sony. And I've always had cinema cameras. If I did do photography, I'd probably look at something like the R5 or switching over to Canon, just because I still think they are just absolutely crushing it in the photography game. But given my sole video, yeah, I'm definitely happy on the Sony boat for now.
You know, you had the C100 Mark II for quite a while. What did you jump to?
I sold the C100 Mark II for the Ursa Mini Pro 4.6, which I absolutely love that camera, and I absolutely hate that camera. If I think about it right now, I love it, and I wish I would have never sold it, and I'm so mad that I sold it because it's such an incredible camera. But I just try to put myself in the mindset of when I owned it, and B-RAW was not a thing, and the file management of Blackmagic was rough. I just could not get smaller file sizes. I could not shoot any kind of compressed format. I was stuck to just paying an asinine amount for CFast cards, or buying one of those adapters that had the CFast cable coming off to go to an SSD. And just when it came to file maintenance, it was horrible running the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro when it was kind of early on. But I think it was only a couple months after I sold it off that B-RAW was announced, which is kind of annoying. And I'm a little upset I sold it. But
you sold it, and what did you get instead?
C200.
Yep.
The C200. So I still love the C200, but man, yeah, if I had the Ursa Mini Pro now with B-RAW, I would still have it for sure.
You're the reason that I sold my C100 Mark II and my 5D Mark IV to get a C200. But also,
yeah,
I was looking at the Ursa Mini Pro because I know that I loved, like, when you had it and I got to play around with it, I was like blown away with the image. Mm-hmm. So, but I was kind of the same boat as you. I was like, man, I really don't want to deal with the file sizes of that if I want to shoot RAW. Because it was like the Cinema DNG RAW, which is still like highly coveted today. Like some people have like Pocket 4Ks and they have not upgraded the firmware because they want to keep that Cinema DNG. But yeah, I ultimately was like, no, I'm gonna do the C200. Brayden's having a good time with it, and the fact that in my mind I was like, I can do kind of 8-bit, just typical kind of footage, or I have the option to do RAW with CFast cards, and so I kind of had that little back and forth that I could do. But honestly, I think it was like right after a month of owning the C200 is when Blackmagic was like, "Hey, B-RAW." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah, at that point when B-RAW was announced, I was on the C200 boat. I'd sold my Ursa, and I saw that and was unbelievably upset with myself that I'd left Blackmagic. And honestly, a big reason why I decided to go back to Blackmagic, which I'll talk about in a second, is because of the menus as well, because they had released the new Pocket 4K, and I was looking at the Pocket 4K and I was like, this would be a great B cam to my C200 and a great chance to be able to explore the Blackmagic world again. And the final thing that made me pull the trigger when I was sitting there with it in my cart was just remembering how clean the menus were, and I was like, I want to experience those menus again. So I then pulled the trigger on the Pocket 4K and I rocked the C200 and Pocket 4K for a while, and I still have the Pocket 4K as well. I'm pretty sure you bought the Blackmagic Pocket 4K like within weeks of me buying one.
When did you buy the Pocket 4K?
I really want to get the dates on the Pocket. Are you able to get your exact date of when you bought it?
Yeah. I mean, I have the BH photo receipt. I'm pretty sure it was April 2020. Yeah, I eventually sold off the C200 as well, and I didn't rock a cinema camera for a while. I actually I sold it off. Didn't have a cinema camera. I just had a Canon EOS R, just because, like you said, I really got into photography. I think the EOS R is what really got me really back into photography. The 5D Mark IV definitely did, but the R, I think the R is still a fantastic camera. I rocked that for quite a while, and then in the year of 2020, in the thick of it, during it all, is when I was like, I'm gonna get a Pocket 4K.
And we are gonna need to get the date on that specifically, because I think I'm right here. I ordered mine April 7th, 2020.
Oh man, okay. For everyone watching out there, if you've even made it this far, yes, I jumped on the Pocket awesomeness pretty much right after Brayden. You and I were talking about like the Pocket for so long. We were watching so many videos on it, and
we were sending links back and forth like crazy.
Yeah, within 3 weeks after Brayden purchased the Pocket 4K, I purchased the Pocket 4K as well. But I decided to outdo you, and I bought a nice little rig, a full like almost rig.
Yeah, because you bought the rig with it, right?
I bought, yeah. I mean, I
was gonna say, because I started rigging mine out. I bought the cage and the base plate and the top handle and all that stuff. I bought that late May. So I think I bought the Pocket 4K alone. You bought all the stuff with the rig, and then I was like, all right. And then I bought the rig.
Yeah, we just kind of, we helped each other out with, like, I like showed up and I showed you my Pocket 4K rig, and I was like, check it out. And you were like, all right, okay.
Here we go.
Which is still, I mean, which leads us to really, I mean, now 2022, and
yeah.
I'm still rocking the Pocket 4K. Again, I've talked about that camera extensively on this channel. I still, in 2022, that camera is still definitely worth it.
Yeah, do that. That'll look better on camera anyway.
There we go. Let's just go ahead. Ooh, yeah, I barely drank anything. All right, to wrap up this episode of Cheers to Gear and our timeline of all the gear that Brayden and I have acquired over a span of filmmaking, and we've sold it off, and we've ditched brands, and we've gone back to brands. I raise my glass to the journey that all this has brought us to. So, cheers. Well, that does it for me on this episode of Cheers to Gear. Thanks to Brayden for being the first ever guest on Cheers to Gear. And if you aren't subscribed, subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And until next time, shoot to create. Cheers.